folks, and welcome to the latest edition of the Absolute Truth Absolutely podcast. Once again, presenting this edition's topic, your servant in Jesus Christ, Gio. I'd like to speak to you during this episode about how fake modern society is. And please allow me to expound, because I believe that with the examples that I will furnish for our audience, it will become clearer as to why I have titled this particular podcast episode in the manner in which I have, and why it leads me to believe, to state, to declare that modern society is built on a farce. It is fake. And this is leading many people into a state of melancholy, sadness. I don't like to use the term depression because, frankly, depression is a non-existent item. It is a concept that is invented by secular humanism, more specifically psychology, and meant to give the impression that sadness is not a spiritual matter. It doesn't emanate from the spirit, and we see it manifested in the physical realm, but rather sadness is what they call depression, and it is caused by chemical imbalances and such. Let's use a few examples so as to give clarity in what we are mentioning during this edition. Think about what happens in social media. By the way, it also behooves us. It's important for us to mention that this social construct that has been occurring for some time now, meaning the fakery that we see in society, in modern Western Occidental culture, has been happening now since the era of entertainment has been heaped upon us. And I'll expand on that in just a few minutes. But once again, please bear with me while I give the explanation and bring this all together for our listeners. Think about modern society. We live in a day and age where, as one of my favorite writers has stated, people are pretending to be interested in other people's kitsch so that those persons were to give the other individuals the approbation, the likes, the thumbs up, etc. In other words, I will pretend to be interested in whatever you have to state, in whatever it is that you feel is important, which, when we think about it, most of what people believe to be important is whatever it is that they're doing and whatever it is that they feel as if it is of absolute importance, which basically is reduced to what it is that they ate, what music they're listening to, opinions that are not based on fact but on mere ignorance, etc., etc., etc. The typical things that people post on social media that revolves around them and growing their own profile. It's an act of hubris. And these things that are posted on social media, whether it be the picture of whatever it is that that person had for lunch, whatever it is that person wore that particular date, taking pictures with or selfies at the dinner date that they had, or again, it's all an exercise in vanity. If one really thinks about it, it's all fakery. It's all a falsehood. It's all built on a house of cards, as it were. We try to put our best foot forward because we believe that if we do so, we will receive approbation from the community at large. That's what social media is mostly built upon, receiving approbation from your peers. It's another exercise in peer pressure. And then there's this social contract that has been written in people's hearts somehow, that if I give you the like, if I give you the thumbs up, if I give you the approving comment, that you would do the same when I post things that are frankly inane. And in order to keep up appearances, we continue to carefully curate our life and present it as utterly sterile, as perfect, as it were. Allow me to give some examples. You'll notice that most of what people will place on their social media accounts gives a rather skewed and false representation of what happens to them on a daily basis. They would give the impression that everything is great in their existence, as if they are not confronting certain problems, certain issues, vicissitudes, etc. And those that do that, those that will write about certain mental issues or problems with their spirit, or they just engage in a full-throated exercise, as it were, of speaking in a vile manner with cuss words and expressing anger and other things that appeal to baser instincts, you'll notice that a lot of times also that's used to generate controversy and for people to place sympathetic comments to them. I feel your pain, and I hope you do better for yourself, and et cetera, et cetera. Again, notice how it's all engaging in an exercise of vanity. I want everyone to pay attention to me. I want everyone to give me some sort of attention. And many of these individuals have become experts at even faking these things. It used to be that in olden times, you were taught to not repress as it is presented today by many persons, but to keep those sentiments to yourself because it was a sign of prudence. It was a sign of maturity. We wouldn't go around expressing ourselves in this manner in public because it would be a sign of immaturity, childishness, infantilism, etc. That is the way that society used to behave. You would work out these things in private because you did not want to be the prude that would destroy other people's livelihoods, that would destroy another person's day, etc. You worked out these things in private and then you behaved, you comported yourself in an appropriate manner in public. That's been dispensed with for a long time. The more so-called genuine you are through social media, which in reality people aren't putting their genuine selves forward, because if that were to be the case, folks, the fact of the matter is that it would be a rather dark place. And allow me to say this, in some way, shape, or form, social media has actually brought that out in many people. I've even caught myself, and it's something that I have had to amend in my own existence, where I've even found myself being angered by a particular news or a comment that someone left, and I say things in a certain manner to them that I would never express it in such a way face to face. I would say it differently. Not that I wouldn't speak the truth to them. Rather, what I would do is that I would be more tactful in my presentation. But since we're not facing that person, we're not face to face with that person, it leads us to even say things that, again, we frankly wouldn't say in person. And many other people take this to the extreme where they're wishing pain on other people, suffering on other people. And others, frankly, do look to incite violence against those that they disagree with. So, in some way, shape, or form, we do see that social media and the internet culture, as it were, has brought forth people's baser instincts, and they have given, as it were, free rein to those baser instincts. And we see the worst of people sometimes, the worst of society, in this space that we call the internet. So some would say, but that then is real. That's genuine geo. But again, if you think about it, there was restraints on it, as I mentioned beforehand, in public, because you were taught to repress those things for your own sake and for the sake of society at large. We sought to behave humanly among others, with others, etc. And it led to a more or less organized and peaceable social contract. But that is no longer the case. Under the guise of let's be more genuine, under the guise of let's be more realistic, what we've seen is more fakery, as I just mentioned earlier, and also more of our baser instincts making an appearance more frequently in society. And this is bringing forth all of the nastiness, as it were, all of that which is, let's say, reproved, all of that which is sinful. It's coming out more even in our public discourse. So there are certain things now that we have completely shaken off, as it were, taken off the shackles of inhibition, and they are making an appearance, and it is certainly leading to a deterioration in the public conversation, in public treatment, as Jesus states in Matthew chapter number 24. The love of many people are growing cold, etc., because of things such as this, and it's all due to this sort of fakery that we are seeing in the, again, internet culture. But again, it's not just a modern manifestation. It's not something that has made an appearance in the modern age. Let's retreat somewhat. Let's relive, as it were, some of the previous decades to see how we got here, because this has been a slow but steady decline in society. Consider when the entertainment industry became more grandiose, as it were, in people's minds, especially in the Western culture in the United States and other parts. Up until the era of, let's say, the 20th century, the United States and other places in the West were practically given to an agrarian culture. Most people were of the land, as it were. People would till their own land, or if they were just, they worked, as it were, to become magnates or industrious persons, etc. You'll notice that before the dissemination of the diversion that we know and the mind killing, as it were, era of entertainment, most people were given with daily living. And daily living was accompanied by interacting with your fellow man, speaking to them face to face. And this kept, as it were, the discourse in some way, shape, or form, not in all instances, but in many instances, it kept the social contract alive, meaning my relationship with my neighbor. I was speaking to that person. I had a relationship with that person. We had a few things in common, and there were common bonds that held us together. Again, I wish not to make the past, I wish not to romanticize the past, but when we do examine certain eras and compare them with others, we do see that there are certain disadvantages and also some detractions that happen when we compare one thing with another. Certainly, and I am one that will be among the first to say I love the age of the internet for the benefits that it's giving us. Frankly, if you think about it, the fact that we're living in the age of the internet, you're able to hear what I think, what I opine, etc. If the internet were not present, God knows if I'd even have an outlet to speak upon these things. And all these things were kept, as it were, by the gatekeepers, those that had the licensing, the money, the influence, the connections. It was very difficult. Nowadays, you have the internet age, which provides us an avenue. People whom I believe wouldn't have had an avenue, an outlet to speak, very sensible, very intelligent people, to be able to speak to the public at large and bypass many of these gatekeepers whom want to repress the truth in unrighteousness. But when we look at the past, we also see that people were more adept at behaving properly in public, having consideration for their fellow human being. The love of many did not wax cold towards their brother, as we see now. And again, notice how the era of entertainment ushered in this idea of fakery. Allow me to explain. Again, this is before the internet age. When television specifically began to make an appearance, there was a shift in American and Occidental culture where more and more people were seeking an escape for their so-called dreary existences. Most persons were working in factories and sometimes mind-numbing labor where they were just repeating things over and over again in a factory setting for maybe 8-10 hours a day. And many people just wanted to get home and maybe listen to the radio for some time or take their mind off the difficult existence and go watch a movie, etc. And that became more and more prevalent in American and also in American society and Occidental culture. So in essence, there was this religion of escapism that began to occur. And this has advanced onto the modern age, where we find that this escapism is not only a religion, now it's practically a cult, where we're trying to live in the artificial and no longer in the real. We're trying, as a matter of fact, by every means necessary to take the artificial, to take that which is fake, and try to duplicate it in real life. Allow me to explain by using a simple illustration. I think those of you that are listening, I myself, we can identify with what is typical in television programming or through movies. We notice that there's an awful lot of death, there's an awful lot of carnage, there's an awful lot of sex, there's an awful lot of things that practically, again, they exalt that which is deleterious, dangerous, fallen, etc. We understand that that's part of what sells through these Hollywood publications. But if you think about it, think about the things that are portrayed in the films and how people now have been taken to a euphoric state by what is produced in these films, in these television programmings. And now they're trying to relive that or trying to apply that to real life because they find that what is in the content, in the fake, is so euphoric and much more, as it were, exciting than in real life, even though it really isn't. And we'll explain that in short. Then they try to reproduce that in real life. I have one example for you. Think about 50 Shades of Grey. 50 Shades of Grey, according to the studies, was known as mommy porn because it was frankly consumed mostly, both the novels and the film adaptations, by women. There were even a few cases that were reported through the media where many of these women were trying to reenact what they watched through the films and also read through the novels, and then they ended up reporting the persons whom they asked to reproduce what they had read and seen through the novels and the films, respectively, in real life. When you consider this, you ask yourself, what is it that these persons are thinking? They think that in some way, shape, or form, these things that are glamorized in the film, they should be reproduced in real life. But again, that goes to show you that there is a disconnect in many people's minds because somehow they think that what they are consuming through some of this literature and also consuming through many of these films, many of these Hollywood productions, which are mostly things that would never be reproduced in real life. It's just absolutely fake. They're trying now to duplicate it in real life. Again, apply the same principle. Look at what the same tendency is as we see through social media. We see people doing the same thing. They think that the carefully curated lives of the celebrities and of those that imitate that sort of vanity and fakery, they think that somehow that can be applied in real life. Furthermore, when you think about trying to live through the artificial instead of living the real, think about how many hours the typical American spends looking at a screen. I'm not just speaking about the smartphone. I'm speaking about the smartphone. I'm speaking about the tablet. I'm speaking about the laptop. I'm speaking about the computer screen. I'm speaking about television. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the average American is now spending close to between 9 and 14 hours a day before a screen. That is definitely dangerous. Our noses are stuck in the digital. And somehow, when a person asks us to live in the real, to not think that somehow the fake can be reproduced in real life, we become absolutely incensed with that person because we believe that somehow this is contrary to what we ought to do. Give you one example. Think about the amount of persons that go out and eat together. You'll notice now that most persons are digging into their cell phones. Once again, instead of interacting with the person in front of them, they would rather interact with other people through social media or through texting, even though they're not technically in front of them. There is a living, breathing human being in front of them on the other side of the table, which they can interact with, and they're eschewing that. They're choosing not to do that. They would rather do it through these artificial means. And that, again, is growing the coldness, the fakery, as it were, of modern society. So we've seen for many decades, this has been an ever-growing problem where people in the past, in some way, shape, or form, tried to, again, reproduce, relive what is seen on the screen, which is completely fake, until the modern age where now we are wanting to live, as it were, a Hollywood movie, a video game production, etc. Why? I said earlier that many of these productions, many of these things that are produced for mass consumption, what they do is that they harp on things that appeal to our baser instincts, and they exalt, they glorify that which should not be glorified. For example, the carnage, the illicit sex, and all of these other things. Now, of course, they all hide this under the guise of, well, this is simply art trying to make commentary on life. The fact of the matter is that up until a certain point in Western society, art imitated life. Art spoke to what was happening in real life. At some point or another, that became skewed, and certain persons began to believe and disseminate, popularize the idea that art should inform life, that art should, in some way, shape, or form, augment life. And that is where we are at now. Therefore, we see not a few people. They are discontent, malcontents. They are sad, and they don't understand why. Well, when we examine their existence, we see that they are constantly surrounded by what we would call a culture of fakery. Allow me to explain. We're living in a culture, we're living in a society, we're living in a day and age where consumerism has become the norm. You are not defined by your character traits. You are defined by your possessions. You are defined by how you appear in public. You are defined by how vain you are. You are defined by how much you know about popular culture, which, again, it's completely frivolous. It's completely inane. It really doesn't edify in many instances. It actually detracts. These are the things that you are known by. Therefore, you have to steep yourself in that which is fake. Think professional sports, popular culture, including much of the music, which again, many of that, the lyrical content exalts depravity. And the other things, cultural Marxism that are constantly taught through the universities, also promoted through Hollywood productions, etc. There's an absolute exaltation of that which is fake and also which is damaging, which is hurtful to humanity, because if you're engaging in sin, it will kill you. That's the road to perdition. And in this fakery that is constantly promoted is the exaltation of everything, and again leads you directly to perdition. So therefore, when a person like your servant mentions these things, I'm not the only one mentioning this, and allow me to say, I'm not mentioning this to be hubristic, to give the impression that somehow I am trying to exalt myself or raise my profile. That's not the intent. There have been other people whom have made mention of this before. The fact of the matter is that most people can't seem to see that they're stuck in a vortex of falsehood, and then they report being sad. For example, those that consume social media the most, there have been various studies that have shown that they suffer from sadness. Again, the psychologists, the secular humanists would like to call it depression. I call it sadness, melancholy, or melancholia. There are different pronunciations for this, but nonetheless, sadness. And they can't seem to explain why. Well, when we take an intimate look, a closer examination of why they're reporting this, I think it becomes rather evident why. They're comparing themselves to, once again, the carefully curated image that most people put forward of themselves, and then they contrast it and they say, I'm not like this person. I'm not like this celebrity. Look at how great of a living. Look at the mansion they're living. Look at how they dress. Look how much adulation they receive. Look how much money they have. Look how much access to free sex they have. Look how many people are kissing their feet constantly. And yet, as I've pointed out before, and again, a few others have pointed out as well, when we examine those very same people whom are supposedly enjoying all of these things, we see an absolutely miserable existence. My dad made mention of something which I think it behooves us to mention as evidence for what I've just stated. Recently, the former Major League Baseball player David Ortiz was shot in Dominican Republic. Now, I don't know all the particulars of why that's happened. I don't know if they've publicly released the details as to why he was shot in Dominican Republic. But I'd like to make mention of this because he pointed this out in particular about David Ortiz. David Ortiz was a man who always made a vain display of himself, whether he was on the field or off the field. Most recently, when he has become a commentator on Fox Sports, if my mind doesn't fail me here, even on the microphones that they were giving him, he had to showcase the so-called bling. That is a display of ostentatious vanity. Why would you do that? Why would you make a display of how much money you have? You're rubbing it in other people's faces, and it's as if you're saying, I'm better than you are because of the amount of money that I have. That tells me that he is absolutely discontented, because if he really were content with what he had, he wouldn't have to make a vain display of it. But he wants everyone to see how rich he is, how opulent he is living, etc. And it seems to me that even with all of that, he has to seek public approbation in doing so. And that's just one instance. We could point to many celebrities, whether it be in the music industry, Hollywood, and other individuals, that they have to make vain displays of what they have, of their supposed knowledge, etc., because they want other people to give them some sort of exaltation, because they live for public approval. And if you don't give them that public approval, boy, they will vilify you rather quickly for not doing so, because they believe somehow that they're entitled to this praise. Again, it's all based on fakery. Why do I mention all of this? Well, as you all well know, I am a biblical Christian, and the Bible teaches us something completely different. We find, for example, that Paul writes to Timothy that contentment, godliness with contentment, is great gain, because we come with nothing into the world. We're certainly leaving with nothing. If we have food, if we have shelter, we will be happy. Notice that the Bible teaches us that we shall not exalt. We should not exalt. We should not put our stock in material possessions. What we should be content with is the fact that God has granted us life, that he has also given us life in abundance, life eternal, through the sacrifice of his son, Jesus Christ. The Bible assures us, that it tells us that we have to keep everything in its proper place, prioritize things that are important, God, the family, etc., etc., etc. But this generation has everything flipped. What it does is that it exalts things that, frankly, when you idolize them, they bring more pain and suffering than anything else. And it also puts stock on many things that isn't important. Therefore, when people give themselves over to that fakery and are defined by that fakery, they find no contentment in it, even though the world tells them that if they achieve these things, they will find contentment. Therefore, you have tons of people whom see, for example, the praise, the adulation that the professional athletes are receiving on a continuous basis. They see the amount of money that they're making, and they run towards those things, when in reality, it's a very select few who will enjoy those things, that those that spent their lives, the majority of those whom spent their lives trying to achieve that, they never made it. And now it's a field, as it were, of crushed dreams. A play on word on that particular film. But again, those aren't the stories that are typically told. We're only told about those that actually made it, and they are idolized for us. And we enshrine these people in our lives and say, that is what will give me happiness. Again, fame, fortune, access to free sex with women or men, whatever the case may be, etc. All of this is what I need to search for. And yet, when those very same people achieve those things, what we see in many of these individuals is, once again, a lack of contentment. And this also plays in a smaller scale. You have persons whom are constantly consuming that which is fake, that which is produced by those whom are expert producers in fakery. And then they consume these things which are euphoric. They're made that way intentionally because you would never see such things in real life. Let me give you one example to evidence this. Think about the amount of people in our generation that they are absolutely enthralled with Star Wars. I know I may bother a few people with the example that I am giving, but when you think about it, folks, you have to ask yourself, why is it that there are so many people that are absolutely taken? They are enraptured, I think is the term, to this, which is, frankly, if you've seen the first 3 films and the rest of them, if you've seen the films, it's absolute ridiculousness. It's childishness. I mean, to prove this, we need not go any further than see the level of infantilism that is in the men and women whom assist Comic-Con, just to give you one example. And those that dress up when they view, whether it be the Marvel films or the Star Wars films or the DC Universe films, etc. You see that there's a level of infantilism that these people are stuck in, where it seems as if they're going to stay there to perpetuity. Why? Because these people never seemed to check into reality. They never wanted to check into reality. They always wanted to stay checked out of reality. It's an escapism, if you think about it. And again, those things they don't produce any contentment. That's why these persons are constantly asking for a new dopamine hit, as it were. They're asking for a new euphoric experience, the new film, the new trailer, the new toy, etc., the new video game, etc. Because again, these things are designed, as it were, to augment reality. But it gets to the point where so many people now, they look at reality and they say, wow, reality by comparison is boring. I think I prefer the fake. But again, it leads to heartache. It leads to malcontents, etc., etc., etc. And as believers, I hope you're a believer. As a believer in Jesus Christ, frankly, this is not fitting for a Christian. And even if you're not a believer, think about it. The order established by God is not for us to live in a world of fakery. It is not for us to live in a world of vanity. The Bible has plenty to say of vanity, none of it good. The Bible wants us to live, God wants us to live in a manner in which there is human flourishing, the way that God designed it to be. When we think about that which brings about human flourishing, we have to look at that which brings human flourishing. First and foremost, an intimate relationship with our Creator being the one whom designed everything in nature, creation itself. And therefore, if you want to see how something works properly, you visit you consult the Creator, and the Creator has his perfect, absolutely perfect design for humanity. So we visit God and we ask him, we allude to him and ask him, how am I supposed to function? How am I supposed to work? How am I supposed to operate? One example of this is masculinity. Masculinity is under constant attack, vilification by many factions in our society, whether it be the feminists, whether it be the LGBT or the so-called LGBT movement. And many men are looking for solutions because now their inherent traits, in other words, masculinity, manliness, are being attacked as destructive for society, as a cancer, as some sort of plague. And men are checking out continually because they're being told by others, we don't want you. And there are a few that have tapped into some of the things that the Bible has to say, but in some way, shape, or form, they still pervert them. Give you an example. I've spoken at length about Jordan B. Peterson. One of the reasons that he has such a massive audience is because he takes a lot, he steals a lot from the biblical ethic and presents that to men, but then he tries to decontextualize that from the Creator, the one whom gave this advice. But again, in all of the psychobabble that he gives, there's more and more confusion. I know there will be some who will say, but his words, his teachings have changed my life. The fact of the matter is, folks, that I can give you common sense advice and give you the impression that somehow I am smarter than the rest and speak in absolutely esoteric language. But when you think about the basis for a lot of what he teaches, some of the more so-called profound stuff, it's in reality esotericism. It is mixed with mysticism, mixed with a whole mess of things that when you think about it, it's just an absolute gumbo of nonsense that doesn't bring any contentment. It doesn't bring any flourishing, etc., etc. We can mention that in another edition. And again, if you want to, you can look up some of the other things I've had to mention about him through the website and also through other podcast episodes that I have mentioned. I'm not going to take more time with this on this edition. But nonetheless, there's a reason why men flock to Jordan B. Peterson, because in some way, shape, or form, he has mentioned a few things which have told men, straighten yourselves out, make your bed in the morning, etc. Things that, in other words, are holding men to some level of responsibility. But again, instead of alluding to Jordan B. Peterson, why don't we allude to the one whom told us that we should originally, the one that told us, gain responsibility. Be a man like I intended for you to be, like I created you to be. Fulfill the role that I have given to you, and you will find contentment in it. You find many of these men who followed Jordan B. Peterson, whom said, I began to take responsibility for myself. I began to behave more manly, and I found contentment. Right, because you're filling the role that God, Creator God, made for you. Not because Jordan B. Peterson somehow tapped into some hidden knowledge that we've rediscovered, and this, in a mystical manner, brings about a correction in society. No, in no way, shape, or form. Many of the things that he has stolen from the Bible, many of the things he's perverted, but nonetheless, many of the things that he's stolen from the Bible, frankly, if you were to just visit the scriptures, I could avoid you having to buy 12 rules for life and not have to tap into many of the, again, errors that he espouses. Nonetheless, returning to the essence of what I've just mentioned, think about it. We need to return to a sense of reality. We need to return to reality, period. How do we do that? Well, I think first we need to take an account. We need to categorize that which we are engaged in to see whether or not we are engaging with reality and with creation, with our role within creation, enough to bring satisfaction and bring human flourishing to ourselves and to others. Well, how do we do that? Again, I think the answer is very basic. It's very fundamental. If we return to the scriptures and we find God's design for humanity, I think it tells us very clearly, implicitly and explicitly, God wants us to relate to one another. That warmth in human contact, and I'm not meaning here in a sexual way. I think everybody understands with a clean mind what I'm alluding to. When we interact with one another, there is certainly something that we can gain from each other. I giving to you, you giving to me, etc. In that exchange, we find warmth, we find edification, we find help, we find strength, we find happiness because God created this physical realm so that our spirit may be edified through what happens in the physical. Allow me to give you an example. In that moment where you were feeling sad, in that moment that you were feeling anguished, in that moment where you were feeling despondent, someone came along and gave you a word of encouragement. Or in some instances, someone gave you a word of correction. And you needed to hear that because, frankly, you were on the wrong path. And that word of correction, that word of encouragement was all that you needed to rectify that which was erred in your life. You gained something from that. You found flourishing, you found warmth. And frankly, when that person either extended their hand to give you a handshake or gave you a hug, you were edified by that. We would describe it in layman's terms as that made me feel good. Well, guess what? You can't achieve that same level of warmth through a screen. You can't achieve that same level of intimacy through a screen. You can't achieve that same level of depth in interaction through the World Wide Web. You need to have physical, face-to-face, eye-to-eye contact interactions with other people and do so in honesty. You see, honesty is real. That which we portray through the internet or through social media is fake because we want people to give us approval. Again, it's this contract that we've engaged in. It's unspoken of, but I'll pretend to be interested in your non-interesting things if you will agree to be interested in my non-interesting things. If you think about it, I'm not interested in you for you. I'm not interested in you for who you are. You're not interested in me for who I am. We're interested in each other because we're using each other's as instruments for social approbation. That is a cheapening of the human experience. That is a cheapening of human relationships as God intended. That's just to give you one example. So we find then that we need to spend less and less time in the artificial realm and give ourselves over to more and more of the physical realm so that we can regain empathy. Allow me to say this. One of the things that I've noticed is that with this cheapening of discourse in the internet, and also the baser people interact, if you can call that, or communicate with each other on the internet, the more that has brought humanity to wax cold as it pertains to empathy. For example, we notice that there are certain persons whom are such idolaters of sports teams that when someone doesn't perform, their favorite athlete, the athlete that they idolize, doesn't perform to what that person expects, absolutely to perfection. Even though we're humans, we're not going to perform to perfection continuously. We find that these persons have very harsh words to say to that particular individual. And suddenly we're lacking in empathy. And as a matter of fact, we begin to think that that person now is subhuman, that they're disposable, that they can be simply replaced because they're no longer giving us what we desire, the euphoria of the home run or of the goal scored or of the touchdown made, etc. Notice that suddenly now we look at the person more from a utility standpoint instead of seeing them as human beings. And that leads to a lack of empathy and also to humanity's love growing cold, as Jesus said. It states, and we read it in Matthew chapter number 24. So we need to distance ourselves from these vortexes. We need to distance ourselves from these things that are fake and give ourselves over to understanding that we're living among what we know to be the human race. Well, Gio, how do we do that? Well, I think it comes with, first and foremost, an understanding that we are as human as the other person, and that person is as human as we are. Meaning this, that person should not receive our adulation no matter how many industries try to prop these people up so as to make you an adherent to the product that they're selling. And the product that they're selling, as it were, is fake when you think about it, whether it be an athlete, a celebrity, etc. And everything, the public persona, as it were, that's a fake as well. It's all meant to put more money in the pockets of the industries for whom these people work or whom these people support, and it also enriches them at the end, whether it be, again, professional sports, whether it be celebrity culture, whether it be the music industry, all of these things, they're all built upon fakes. And then these very same people, through their ridiculous, and erred opinions have ways of influencing you. And since you idolize them, especially you idolize their persona, the fake, as it were, you begin to adopt these things. You begin to believe that that is somehow reality. And again, it leads you further down despondency, further down perdition. We need to we need to eliminate that first and foremost. How do we do that? Distancing ourselves from that which is fake. One of the things that I have continually advised is for persons to no longer engage in social media the way that they have engaged up until the present. Well, Gio, what do you mean by that? Folks, don't spend 2, 3, 4 hours a day on Facebook. There's just no need for it. If you want to find out what another person is and you want to interact with them in an intimate level, visit them at home or have them visit you. Do it in a face-to-face interaction. Don't continue to be part of this ecosystem, as it were, this internet system of fake relationships. Do so in the way that God intended it to happen, face-to-face, in a physical sense. That's number one. Number two, don't give yourselves over. Do not idolize the very persons or the things that these industries that are built on fakeries. Don't idolize those things. Don't idolize those people. How do I do that, Gio? Well, frankly speaking, give yourself over to less and less mind-numbing entertainment. Gio, but I need an escape. Why do you need an escape? Think about it. Is your life that mundane where you need to escape it on a daily basis? Because it seems that our culture is now built on this cult of escapism. I need to escape on a daily basis. That's why I binge watch Netflix. That's why I binge watch Hulu. That's why I watch television, frankly, all day and all these programs. Why? Why are you constantly engaged with the fake? What happened to the real? I continue to make emphasis on this. Why aren't you giving yourself over to the real? Human interactions with your Creator, prayer, reading the Bible, giving yourselves over to simply speak to people, play games with people, etc. These things are things that our ancestors used to do, and you never heard them complaining, as it were, of sadness, despondency. We're living in an absolutely comfortable existence, folks. Frankly, poverty doesn't exist. I know some of you will say, but look at the amount of homeless people there are in LA. No, those people choose to be homeless because they choose to live in poverty, folks. You have plenty of opportunity in Occidental culture, at least what's left of it. All of this eroding with cultural Marxism and anything. But still, frankly, when you think about it, there's no reason for people to be poor. Anyone that wants to pull themselves up from the bootstraps and actually work and have a good, solid work ethic can come out of poverty. It shouldn't be in poverty. Those that want to be in poverty want to be in poverty. Those that are in poverty want to be in poverty. Going back to the point, eliminate all of these these influences that lead you to enthrall, lead you to be completely enraptured with that which is fake. Because then when you try to duplicate that in real life, it makes real life look, again, boring, and you'll constantly want to check out, even though what you're consuming is not real. One of the examples that comes to mind about this, if you think about it, are some of these women that are protesting the reduction in abortion clinics and also the passing of these laws that restrict abortion. Thankfully, that movement is garnering steam in the United States so we can finally stop the genocide that has been occurring since Roe v. Wade and even some time before that in the United States. We find that many of these women are actually headed out to the protest dressing as these actresses in The Handmaid's Tale. And if you know anything about The Handmaid's Tale, you'll know I've never seen an episode. I don't say this to be sanctimonious. I simply have read the summaries of the show, and it's in essence, the producers themselves have admitted that it's a show against Christianity and how Christianity has traditionally so-called repressed women. That's one of the reasons that these women, again, notice that they're watching this and they think it's also happening in real life. So therefore, let me dress the way that they dress these actresses because it's happening in real life, even though they're not wearing the red robes. We're not wearing the red robes in real life. The repression that the women experience in this show is happening in real life. Notice being misled. They're living a world that is practically false. On top of that, when you look at also the things that people are consuming, I mentioned it earlier, 50 Shades of Grey, whatever it is that people are consuming through video games, etc., we're no longer interacting with the world around us. And it brings absolute sadness. We're not even taking time to contemplate things anymore. Silence is no longer an essential part of our existence. We're constantly surrounded by noise. Just look around and see how many people are constantly connected to, again, or have their earphones on. They can't stop without the noise. They can't live without the noise. And frankly, you need silence. It's been proven over and over again. You don't need statistics to prove this. The best way to ingest material, the best way to retain what you're reading, what you're studying, etc., is through silence. But even then, people are no longer studying in silence. They have their earphones connected. When a person is talking, they can't stay at attention. They can't be disciplined enough to focus on what the person is talking about. They can't speak for more than, a few seconds, if not a few minutes at a time, because now their attention is diverted with a million other things, whether it be pornography, etc., or whatever else is going on in their mind through what they consume. So again, I think it's important for us to disconnect, as it were, from that which is fake and reconnect with that which is real. How do we do that? Let me condense this for you. I just gave you a few, but let me give you the essence of what I am advising here. Number one, if you are a person that is a heavy social media user, don't use it heavily anymore. In essence, what you're going to do is now you're going to use social media as a conduit. You're going to use it as an avenue through which you speak truth. Instead of engaging in this contract of sorts that I was speaking about earlier, what you're going to do is do exactly what Jesus tells us that we ought to do. Go into all the world and make disciples. How do we do that? You go to where the multitudes are. Unfortunately, many multitudes now are no longer gathering in the public square physically. What they're doing is they're gathering in the internet square, where that is where you go and that is where you preach the gospel. And you only engage in social media to simply put out a message of truth. Don't get sucked up in the vortex, as it were, of social media, where now people are constantly connected and they're having to answer many vicious and vile comments. And many times one is led, as it were, or taken by many people to answer in a way, and you diminish your character by behaving in the way that many of these people whom are reprobates behave on social media. There's no need for that. It leads to a growing cold of humanity's love and sympathy and empathy for one another. That is certainly seeing itself also manifested. We're seeing that manifested in the physical world. That's number one. Number two, see how much time you are consuming that which is fake and compare how much time you're doing that which is truly edifying. For example, I know very many people whom they've had dreams, they've had aspirations of, for example, opening their own business and becoming independent when we're speaking about economic issues. And yet they haven't done so because instead of working hard to make that a reality, once they finish their 8 to 5, their 9 to 5, what have you, they arrive home and all they do is binge watch movies and whatever's on popular entertainment channels, etc., until the next day, and rinse repeat over and over and over again. We're wasting away invaluable time, giving it over to that which again exalts, which is sinful, and then again is exalting also the fake. Reduce that. Reduce it to that which, if you are going to have a moment of entertainment, then do it with something that is clean. Monitor that and say, this is the allotted time I'm going to give it, but it's not going to take up the majority of my time. And replace that with, again, human interactions, deep interactions. Leave your cell phone at home. Speak to the person. Be interested in what they have to say to you. Engage in thought-provoking conversations, etc. Read good books. Read the Bible, etc. And also take time on a daily basis to, again, contemplate. I'm not speaking here about transcendental meditation. No. What I'm speaking here is about biblical contemplation, biblical meditation, meaning you sit and you ponder issues. You ponder your relationships. You ponder where you are in your development of character. You ponder how you should continue forward with certain decisions. You need those quiet times. And in those very same quiet times, you pray and you interact with God. The Bible says we should pray without ceasing, meaning that God should be involved in our every decision, in our every thought, in our every action, in our daily living. Suddenly, when you're re-engaging in this way with the, let's call it sphere, mechanism, instrument, however you want to call it, that God designed for us, for our flourishing, suddenly you will see things in a different light. Suddenly, you will notice that you will begin to flourish. Suddenly, you will notice that you will begin to see things for what they are, and no longer give your time over to that which is frivolous, which is inane, which exalts all sorts of sinfulness and is leading you towards a life of practically vanity, hedonism, etc., etc., etc. And when you can when one is in that state of absolute clarity, and that can be achieved, but you have to take these steps. Once that is achieved, boy, you will live an existence which is so fulfilling. Because one of the reasons is that you will see falsehood for what it is, you will expose it, and you won't live according to it. And therefore, when you truly live, that is where you will find absolute contentment. But first, you have to distance yourself from that which is constantly pushing you to live in absolute fakery. I hope in some way, shape, or form that the advice that I have dispensed and the analysis that I have provided will help you to do just that. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email me, gio@godcblog.com. The way that you spell that is Gio. It's short for Giovanni. That's my first name. Gio at giodcblog.com. Once again, Gio at giodcblog.com. We will continue to produce these podcast episodes regularly, and also stay tuned because my father, Pastor Jesus Martinez, will be joining us for a weekly episode where we're going to do something different than what we've typically done in these podcast episodes. So stay tuned for that. If you want to be alerted as to all of the latest developments, articles that we post on the website, these new podcast episodes are published, etc., please visit our website, giodcblog.com. Again, giodcblog.com. Sign up for the email updates. They are completely free. And again, if this ministry in any way, shape, or form has edified you, informed you, please consider making a recurring donation. That will help us to continue to expand the reach of this ministry, and also it will help us to stay afloat financially. All of these things have a cost that are incurred with trying to reach out to the public with this message that we believe to be biblical. And if in some way, shape, or form you have been edified and informed by it, share by grace what you have been given by grace. And the way that you do that is by helping us monetarily. So visit the website, giodcblog.com, and you will find that there is a manner there, a way for you on the website to donate on a monthly basis. That's all for this edition. Thank you so much for listening. Until the next occasion that we meet, may the Lord shine his face upon you.